Our next item is a panel discussion, which is going to be looking at the topical issue of navigating the AI regulatory landscape to encourage technical innovation. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists. To introduce them and facilitate the conversation, please give a very warm welcome to our moderator, Dr. John Truby. He's an artificial intelligence law professor at the National University of Singapore. John.
Thank you very much. And I have with me here an esteemed panel from different disciplines within the field of AI and connected disciplines. So we have to the far right of we have Ram Kumar, who is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Cigna International Health, and he's the head of Cigna Global Center of Excellence. Very experienced speaker. We have Faisal Hamadi, Managing Director and Partner of BCG, another excellent panelist. Then we have with us Sarah Wire from Durham University, who is currently doing a PhD in language learning models, focusing on gender and AI. And terrific panelists again. And then we have actually a former colleague of mine, I believe, Professor Abdulaziz Al-Ali, who is the director for the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the Ministry of Finance of Qatar. Another wonderful panelist. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you to the audience for joining. And our subject is broad. There's a lot of different fields within it, so we're only going to be able to touch on these subjects today, on the issues, a lot of opportunities and risks related to AI and data governance, and best practices for establishing robust digital governance frameworks. So we're going to have a casual conversation about these different areas, coming from different perspectives. My background is legal, AI governance, and in this field I've had to learn a lot from IT fields and computer science. I'm going to start first, if I may, with Ram Kumar, who's been working in AI for 38 years. So a long time. Before it was topical, maybe he knows all of Alan Turing. I don't know. So, Ram, you're working a lot in AI and looking at can you describe a bit about the balance between the legal and ethical side and then the actual implementation from the technical side?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Yep. So, I started working in AI since 1986. So in 1991, I built a large big data-based AI solution for a large government organization in Australia, and that's when we implemented the first AI governance framework, because we implemented an AI solution that impacts the society. And since then, have done data governance, AI governance, been beaten left, right, and center by organizations who really didn't understand about data and the value it brings. So tried different techniques, different methodologies on how do you ensure that data and AI governance are implemented as part of the organization. My view, having the processes, tools, and technologies are the easy bits. It's about the culture, having the mindset of data as a strategic and competitive asset and as the lifeblood of an organization. If organization gets that right, then everything is possible. Once you have the governance aspects around data, then anything is possible. Today AI, tomorrow AGI, day after tomorrow it's super intelligence, who cares? Until yesterday, people talked about data science. So what we did, the framework that we implemented successfully, is basically focus on the foundational and how to get the right balance between using data to drive monetization or AI to drive value creation versus the risks around implementing those sort of solutions. So to get that going, what we thought is that instead of having an AI governance framework, a data governance framework and stuff, the lifeblood of AI is data. The lifeblood of a technology solution is data. The lifeblood of a data science solution is data. So what we said, we built a strong framework, which is a data risk management framework across the whole life cycle of data, right from the way you collect the data, the way you organize, the way you classify, the way you store, the way you use, the way you retain and destruct, including data quality. And the use component of the life cycle is where AI, data science, technology all comes in place. It's the use side. So once we built that framework, so we focused on acceptable use of data or responsible use of data, ethical use of data, and from a social perspective, how you use the data. Once we built that framework from a risk perspective, everything was associated with the business risk. Building AI solution or AI governance on top of that is straightforward. If your data is responsible, your AI is going to be responsible. If your data use is ethical, your AI use is going to be ethical. So we built that framework and things like model governance. Because when you look at the life cycle of data, you govern the life cycle of data until it's destroyed. Because it's active, it's at rest or it's in motion. Even for AI, data is in motion. So once we built that framework, and from a risk perspective, then what we did now is that things like privacy, legal aspects around different countries. I have managed teams in 45 countries. Currently, I manage teams in over 37 countries, working with different CEOs and CFOs. So we have all the data residency and all those challenges. So what we have done, because we have this unique framework, which we believe is the first of its kind, because it takes a data approach, we now use GenAI on top of it so that every use case, whether it's technology, analytics, or business solution, have to go through that framework to ensure that it is in alignment. And when you deal with privacy aspects, we use GenAI basically to help us tell, OK, I'm going to put this solution in a different country. What are the legal, regulatory requirements, rather than relying on the chief privacy officer and all the other people to help us. So the users of that use case will be able to decide what are the legal regulatory implementation and what are the controls you have to put in place. A lot of people say, but AI governance is much more than data, but it has things like bias, trustworthiness, drift in the AI models. But because AI, now we use the word AI, but 8 years ago or 2 years ago, the word data science, I think now it's all forgotten. Because data science has become suddenly a bad word, everything is AI. So because we had data science and model governance and everything involved as part of the data risk management framework, then AI is also governed. So that's the approach we have implemented across all our countries, about 37 countries, and we have only a team of 3 people managing the whole AI and the data governance around that. So,
Thank you. Very interesting. Faisal, if I may. So we're at a really interesting stage where there's huge financial business opportunities for society to capitalize on AI. And there's also a lot of concern about the safety aspects, the risks, data privacy, ethics, and cyber security risks. Can you give us a little insight about your work in Qatar on the policy and strategy and governance side, and how that's seeking to capitalize on the benefits and manage the risks?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. I think it's very critical, as you said, to tie the business opportunity with the actual policy and regulatory implications of that, because there's always a balance that policymakers are trying to create, specifically when it comes to capturing the business opportunity of AI, but at the same time creating the innovation ecosystem that will be able to deliver on this, while looking into some of the policy considerations that Ram, you mentioned earlier about privacy, about ethics, and a couple of others. This is a tight balance, right? And then there's always push and pull to some extent. I think what's very imperative is to look into the opportunity first and say, the current estimates are AI will be a $15 trillion opportunity from an economic perspective by 2030. That's, to put that in perspective, that's the GDP of China today, right? So imagine how much pull that's creating from a market perspective. From the other side, the government regulations, the policy making, I would say, is at the moment still at the primitive stage. We're still thinking of AI as rules. We have all seen the AI law that was published by EU, and while this was welcomed by open arms, and I think it's a very good intent and application, by the time this has been published and debated 2-3 years within the EU parliaments, most of the clauses are in there, I would argue, are to some extent obsolete or would need much more refreshment, right? So there is a much more faster cycle, different approach to policy making, to governance that needs to be made. And it's not by doing the same tools of or instruments that we have been using in the past. It needs a completely new approach. It needs a completely new model. And some of these are creation more of sandboxes that can allow innovation within controlled environments, and to see this, whether they're spatial, temporal, or other types of sandboxes, but also public-private collaborations to also bring the public sector up to speed, where they're looking into the overall frameworks, policy making, and regulations, while making sure that they understand the dynamics of the market in a much tighter loop, I would say.
Thank you. Very interesting. Sarah, so you've got a very interesting niche that you're working in to do with gender AI in LLMs. And a lot of the concerns about AI, and especially when we've used generative AI, have been to do with concerns about discrimination because of poor data training sets, and then possible evolution in AI, which makes it become a bit risky in terms of giving ethical outputs. So when we think about the subject of bias and discrimination in terms of both the Gen AI and then when we use AI to just automate our decisions, can you give us an insight into the kind of practices that might help to solve this, and then also any areas you've identified of the risks and problems that you've seen?
Yeah, what I would say is that diversity is key, right? So when we're when we're creating AI, we're baking in our biases within AI. So if you've got a group of white men creating the AI, then their biases are going to be baked into that. So it's key to have diverse teams within your development, and what I would say is all of the decision making around that needs to be diverse too. So project managers, deployment strategists, everybody who's involved in that life cycle. It's important to be diverse so that we're not baking in this bias, and obviously that creates a feedback loop as well. So we've got this. We create an AI. So for Gen AI, ChatGPT, for example. We create something that's rather biased. When I started my PhD, I'm doing it part-time, so I started it 5 years ago, and I was playing around with something called GPT-2 at the time. Not many people had heard about it, and I spoke to my supervisor. I was like, I tell you what, I'll just have a look and see if there's any bias in that. And immediately, within seconds, I just typed in men are, and it said men are leaders. And I said, women are, and it just came back with lots of derogatory terms about women in all kinds of scenarios. So yeah, it was very insightful that that this AI was out there already. They then obviously progressed to GPT-3, and that was released, and we all know the story behind that. But the same principles apply, right? They knew their lived experience was of generally white males, and that's how they were seeing the world at the time. There weren't any flags that they saw. So I would say diverse teams, absolutely. Representative data is key. If we're scraping the internet, then not everybody has access to the internet, right? If you think about the group of people that you know in your own lives, I mean, how many people are using the internet? Is your mum using the internet? Are your grandparents using the internet? Are your neighbours? Not everybody's using the internet, and if we're scraping that data, it's not necessarily representative of society. It's representative of people who use the internet. I would say that independent audit is essential. Not marking your own work. Organisations tend to do that at the moment. freedom to challenge the status quo is important too. So if we think about when ChatGPT, for example, when that was launched, we all know about that. But Google did create the transformer architecture, and Timnit Gebru, who was the AI ethicist at the time, said, you know, I'm not sure about this. There are a lot of ethical concerns that we need to think about. And there was a big debate about, like, she said that she was fired because she raised concerns. Google said that she wasn't fired. I mean, that's another debate. But again, do we have AI ethicists within a company? And then if they say something that we don't like, do we just kind of remove them from that picture? So do we need whistleblowing systems in place? And then obviously transparency as well, I would say, is really important.
Very interesting. Thank you. And I understand you were working on from ChatGPT 2 until recently with 4.0. So
yeah, so seeing that trajectory and seeing the changes, and obviously it's really interesting because the GPT compared to GPT-2 has changed. It's not as biased. They've put safeguards in place, more guardrails, and you know, we can talk about how they did that. There are other ethical questions about how that happened, but the systems have improved. The key thing for me is, when do we deploy an AI? Do we say we're going to be led by market forces? We want to be a market leader in this area. I understand market forces, but at what point do we say, you know, we're going to relinquish an AI model, and then, you know, it can have an impact on society? Where are our red lines in society? And that's a debate for all of us to have a chat about. Yeah.
Thank you. And Dr. Abdulaziz, so you've got some very interesting experiences working in machine learning, spotting fake news, and so on in the past, and then now you're involved in the this new center for the fourth industrial revolution. What are your how do you see, you know, appropriate governance from the kind of technical and legal aspects?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think if we look at governance has been even more challenging only recently. If we look at a decade back, or even maybe slightly before that, most of the models that were developed by machine learning, they had finite outcomes, you know, so they were easily assessed, whether it's a supervised learning model or even for some unsupervised techniques. I think if we were to ask the same question 10 years ago, the answers would have been much easier than today. So two things have changed ever since. So we now tap into those general models that were not built for specific use cases. And it's almost the reverse. Before, we used to have a use case and we're trying to develop a model for it. Now we're developing a model and then finding the use cases for it. So it's almost the other way around. So that's number one. And then number two, the proliferation of these models, the adoption, the wide adoption of these models is now at an unprecedented speed. So even before, if we had to put in any regulation, maybe it would have lasted for a few years. But I think, as echoed, even, you know, I'm sure here my co-panelists, you know, from ChatGPT 2 and then going to 4, one has to keep up, right? And I think governments will have to think of the same, they have to have the same way of thinking. We cannot have rules that maybe we will set today for the next 5 years. I think those should be revised almost, you know, very periodically, and especially when there are releases of these new, you know, models that could potentially have harm. I think it's now that we have these general models that are being adopted, so how can we solve the governance issue? I don't think any single entity can work alone in trying to define, you know, regulation, or to try to even test these or evaluate these models. There's always going to be use cases that are going to be loose, or no one have caught this kind of use case. So I think, and maybe here this is where the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution is part of a network of centers worldwide that are affiliated with the World Economic Forum. The spirit of collaboration has to be there from the beginning. I think a lot of shared experiences, I know when people say, collaboration, maybe data comes into mind, but there are a lot of things that may not be as sensitive that can be shared. So experiences, incidents. I'm very happy today to have a AI incidents database that is public out there where you can see the latest incidents that happen. I think any government or private institutions that are going to adopt AI, it's probably worth it to have someone keeping up with these incidents, so we don't fall into the same those mistakes again. And I'm also part of the IGA, which stands for AI Governance Alliance Group under the World Economic Forum. And whenever I prepare for one of those meetings, I come up, okay, maybe it's about this governments, or we're talking about data, sharing, for example. I come up with a few use cases, but I'm impressed always. When you go to the meeting, you always have different perspectives. Maybe just to give an example, should these models be different for children, or what kind of data can be gathered, from children? Maybe they need different regulation. I was thinking more in a generic term, again, because we have a generic model, but then you really need the collaboration from all. Otherwise, I think same mistakes will, have to be repeated. And unfortunately, also environmentally, also it might be, less prudent to, go through so many trials when someone else might have solved this, and you could get the model running from the first time. So just to maybe to give examples of collaboration that are not model sharing or, sharing of data, one could easily share the data cleansing, for example, techniques, or how to evaluate whether your data is clean or not. So that doesn't have to be very private, but at least it will help towards a more responsible adoption.
Thank you. I'm going to now move on to the subject that I think we'll hear a lot about in 2025, agentic AI and autonomous AI. And then anyone who wants to answer can, it's open. So we're going to be tasking AI to autonomously decide, as I understand it, how to achieve an objective that we give it. So if it's on our phones, you might be saying, hey Siri, find me a pet-friendly coffee shop within 2 miles of where I am, and make me a reservation for 7 p.m. and invite 3 contacts of mine. I hope Siri didn't hear that, because she'll start doing it. Now apply that to industry. I think this is going to have huge uses, huge benefits for us. But I'm also, and again, I'm not a tech guy, concerned. I'll give a basic example. When I send something to my wireless printer to print, if I press cancel, it continues to print because it wants to get there, and it's already got, and there's no way I can stop it. So if the AI either misunderstands my instruction and it's autonomous, or if the AI doesn't let me cancel it, it's going to continually try to achieve its objective, and that might produce harmful results. There's many risks I can see in that. Would anybody like to comment on that, like agentic AI and how we can manage it, or are there management frameworks in place for this? I know there's the AI management systems framework, but yeah, any thoughts on that?
I can get started maybe with a few thoughts. Look, I think it's a very interesting part, and I think as you speak about AI agents, I would say let's fast forward a few years down the line rather than thinking of the current scale, although there's several thousand AI agents already deployed and few millions in few years, right? But if you fast forward a little bit, where you have millions of AI agents that are deployed that are already taking on tasks, you do not want this to be, in sense of trying to safeguard this, to be I consent to the use of cookies, or I agree to the terms and conditions for privacy, and then without knowing what are you signing up for, basically, right? Because to some extent we're getting this proliferation of models that Dr. Abdelaziz mentioned earlier, and this AI services, AI agents are being embedded in the everyday activities, whether it's deciding on who goes on the plane or who goes on the bus, or whether we like it or not, some social scoring around who gets the loans or who doesn't get it, and so on, right? So this is getting a lot of proliferation. One aspect is to think about, for instance, is to say, will governments ever have the capacity and capability to be able to regulate this in the first place, right? Whether we speak about regulation or not. Earlier in the panel, we said this panel is going to be more about raising questions than giving answers, and I would raise some of those questions, right? Will we, as a humanity, and specifically as policymakers looking for those frameworks, ever have capacity or capability to be able to look through these? So that's one question, right? I think a second question to also answer is, are we going to regulate AI as a horizontal? Are we going to continue to think of AI as horizontal? I would give a parallel, though very different, to electricity. So when electricity adoption started, people did not regulate electricity to some extent. They were regulating the verticals within electricity. Say, user devices such as microwave need to have that much power output or that much safety regarding to them. Also in cars and others. And I think as you speak about autonomous systems, we need to start thinking more vertically about these and also regulating the outcomes rather than only saying, are we giving the right data or are we giving only the right frameworks? Because these, I would argue, while with a good intent, are very primitive and are, let's say, regulations of the past rather than how will this evolve into the future.
Thank you. Very interesting. Now, one thing we keep hearing in terms of regulation, so a few of you have touched on the EU AI Act and then there have been other acts. How kind of scared is tech of this kind of regulation? I don't know what you think about that. So we keep hearing this message that Europe will not have an AI unicorn because it's got too many regulations. And I don't know if that's true or if that message is coming from big tech. So here's the question. Do you think the regulation is putting off other places outside of America from getting to AI unicorns? Or is it because all the money is already in California and to make a successful tech company with AI, you need to be in California? Has anyone got any thoughts on that?
So, I mean, I agree with Faisal. My view, legal and regulation will never catch up with AI. The pace in which AI is going on, revolutionizing the industry, they will always be lagging behind. But when it comes to practical implementation, obviously, as an organization like ours, healthcare, we got to comply with whatever local regulations we have. But my view is that it's up to the organization how they want to control the proliferation and adoption of AI from an organization perspective. That's what I would rather focus on, while legal and regulation does happen. So that should be tied to, my view, tied to the core values of the organization. What does the organization really want to do from an ethical standpoint perspective, from a social perspective? Okay, while legal regulation are good boundaries to define, but what as an organization you want to do? Do you want to do the right thing from a customer perspective? Because access to customer data is a privilege customers has given to us by placing trust that we will use it responsibly. So the solution we build, is it responsible in the way we want it to be responsible? It should be tied to the core value of the organization from a social, ethical, privacy, and legal and regulatory perspective.
Because also I'd add that organizations would have skin in the game in this regard, right? You're not speaking about general regulations. You'd have this organization that's providing these type of services. People will create the trust versus not. Correct. So that's a very interesting also angle to look at.
Yeah, so everything we do in AI as in health services, there is a social obligation, expectation in the society that we are a healthcare provider. We are here to protect the lives of the customers, help them. So everything we do, we go through a 4 lens, every use case. Whether it's AI, first thing, social lens. If we do this solution using AI or whatever, is it socially acceptable to the community? If we pass that, then we go to the next one called ethical lens. Ethically, is it the right thing to do for our customer? If we pass that, then we apply privacy lens. From a privacy perspective, the point is, legally and in regulatory perspective, you might be doing the right thing, but ethically, you might be doing the wrong thing. So unless we pass the 4 lens, we don't execute any use cases, no matter how exciting that use case is or how much revenue that is going to give us. So it's up to the organization how we work within the boundaries of the framework that is given by the law. but at the same time tying it to the core values of the organization. But when you look at most of the social media companies, they like to cross the creepy line. They always enjoy crossing the creepy line. We don't want to do that. So it's up to the organization.
Thank you. Now, let's think about the issue of AI safety. So there's been AI safety institutes set up around the world, looking at these different issues. Now, we've been talking a lot about AI governance, and this has thankfully been a subject that governments around the world have picked up on, industries picked up on, AI governance to make appropriate frameworks and things. I'm thinking, should we start now that we have started putting AI governance frameworks in place, do we need to start planning for an AI crisis or an AI emergency? So should we have protocols in place for the situation which we don't want to happen but may happen, where there is an AI crisis? For example, today Google's released this new quantum computing, and it may be able to ultimately be coupled with AI to crack any password, to decrypt any device, right? If that happens, anything could happen. Your bank account could be empty. We might not have access to internet. What I don't want to happen is we wake up one day and there's some kind of situation like the pandemic where some places we're not that prepared for. Should we have safety protocols in place for that? Any thoughts on that?
I could, I think at least some businesses, I mean, drawing from cybersecurity, perspective, they're always, of course, on the look for threats that could be zero-day attacks. Or I think same can be done for AI systems. I know it's already there, where they have a hackathon or of sorts, where, and of course with prizes. I think some companies, big tech companies, recently announced one very big one that's going to happen very soon. And I think this is a very good way to motivate finding those loopholes or ways that that we could use, that can break these systems. But I think when it comes to safety, I wanted to add one more thing here. According to a recent survey by Stanford, cooperation with Accenture, although they found that 72 of the surveyed businesses have governance or responsible AI frameworks, but when you look at who operationalized them, it's only 7% actually. So I'm afraid even instituting these frameworks may not be the answer. It's once you have it embedded. So I think when it comes to governance and safety, one of the things I always thought, and this is again drawing back to the discussion we had, is I fully agree that it's very difficult. I don't think we will keep up with the pace that we are at. I don't know if it will stabilize at some point. But maybe governments can appoint some authorities, whether private or not, to have some sort of certification. It may not be, let's say, resilient to all kinds of, whether it's bias, privacy, reliability, the trust. It may not be, the best one, but at least it's the beginning. And I think here the analogy may be drawn from the FDA, how drugs have to go through FDA approval before they're. So maybe something like that, where they don't have to go, but at least if that seal or certification is given, maybe customers would be more likely or less reluctant to use these services. So I think maybe at least as a first step, I hope there will be businesses that will be assessing models, so we can minimize the risk that's coming from these.
Thank you. Sarah, just very quickly, there's a kind of new profession now in algorithmic audit. Do you see that as the best solution or a possible solution for the sort of problems that you've encountered?
I think that it's part of a solution. So independent audit is key. Like I said before, marking your own homework, it only gets you so far. It depends on your value system. If some companies will do it effectively, other companies will take a different stance. So it's having that independent audit, and I think that there's some real value in that. Going back to what you were talking about before as well about safety, safety for who, I think, is a key question about what we're thinking about when it comes to safety. Because if we take autonomous driving, for example, in some cultures, if you have the option if you've just got a binary option, you can either run over an elderly person or you can run over a child. In some cultures, it's more socially acceptable to run over the child. In other cultures, it's more socially acceptable to run over the elderly person if you've got that choice. So it's whose safety, whose value systems are we looking at when we're looking at safety? And is everybody in the room? So Wendy Hall discussed earlier in a discussion earlier about the Safety Summit and about which countries were represented there. And I think that's a real key thing. We just need collaboration right across the globe from all countries to have a voice. And again, it's diversity, right? We need agreement on what safety looks like. And independent audit is part of that as well.
Very good, thank you. Well, we're about almost out of time, so just to sum up, we've had a very interesting discussion about the different types of governance and really interesting perspectives from industry and policy here, looking at these different themes. And I think things that are coming up again and again are the need for appropriate frameworks that are also auditable. And you can have then certification frameworks. There's ISO 42001's perhaps the first step in different types of auditable and accreditable frameworks. Then we need to be thinking constantly about risk monitoring and risk correction and mitigation. And I think if we can train people adequately, we have appropriate AI literacy, we have appropriate AI frameworks and experts in place, then everyone's mentioned these huge opportunities in AI that can benefit us economically and benefit our society and help us actually solve solutions. So we don't have to be as scared, but we do need to be prepared. So thank you, out of time.